future years, the Emira might well be remembered as the last true Lotus sports car. Much is different here thanks to new brand owners Geely, but thankfully much about this car's driver-orientated design is also familiar too. If you're looking for the last gasp of addictive Lotus tyre smoke before the EV era finally dawns upon us, you'll find it here. There will never be another Lotus like this. Like so many others, the Marque is heading into an all-electric future, but just before it does, here is the final sign-off, a proper classic sports car in the finest Lotus traditions, the Emira. Think of it as a successor to the brand's old Evora, and you won't be far off. Much of the underlying structure is shared with that car, and as with the Evora, you can also get a Toyota-sourced 3.5 litre V6 plumbed-in out back, here supercharged and sounding even better. The alternative on test here is an AMG-sourced 4-cylinder turbo 2-litre unit. Either way, the Emira, first launched in 2022, is a much more advanced piece of design than its Evora predecessor, not just to look at, but inside, much more day-to-day usable, and technologically, thanks to parts supplied by new Chinese owners Geely. Potentially then, a much more credible competitor to the two targeted rivals, Porsche's 718 Cayman and the Alpine A110. But just how much more credible? You'll need the usual comprehensive car and driving road test to find out. Lotus cars have traditionally been created around a lightweight mantra that persisted all the way through the brand's history, right up to the point where the Evora was introduced in 2009. That car couldn't be especially lightweight, partly because its power came from a rather substantial Toyota 3.5 litre V6. Weighing in at not much less than 1.5 tons, the Emira is also heavier than you'd expect a Lotus sports car to be, well over 300 kilograms away from the current class lightweight champion, the Alpine A110, which is more the kind of car you'd expect the Hethel brand to have made. But no, we've got something different with a choice of two borrowed engines. That Toyota V6 makes an appearance again, featuring in the Emira in supercharged form, putting out 400 brake horsepower and 420 Newton meters of torque, which means it's good for 62 miles an hour in 4.2 seconds en route to 180 miles an hour. There's a choice between a 6-speed manual gearbox, a clunky but satisfying shifter borrowed from the Evora and the Exige, or a 6-speed paddle shift auto transmission. The alternative to that power plant is another borrowed engine, the 2-litre 4-cylinder unit we're trying here, sourced from Mercedes-AMG, specifically the A45S, though the 360 brake horsepower this twin-scroll power plant puts out here, with 430 Newton meters of torque, is quite a lot less than the 416 brake horsepower and 500 Newton meters of torque offered by Stuttgart's top hot hatch. Use of this M139 series Mercedes engine does, though, unfortunately dictate use of that German brand's DCT dual clutch paddle shift auto transmission, which can sometimes be slow and recalcitrant. There's a slight delay between the paddle being pulled and the shift you've requested being enacted. It's probably the most disappointing thing about the car, with usability issues exacerbated by the way that several tugs at the gear shifter are sometimes necessary to get into the ratio you want when you're manoeuvring about, and the fact that the transmission's occasionally caught indecisively between ratios when pulling away from junctions or roundabouts. This transmission does have a long 1/8 ratio though, so might be a better choice for those likely to use this Lotus for longer distance touring trips. With this base Emira's 2 fewer cylinders and use of that mandatory auto, you might expect quite a performance deficit to the V6 variant, compensated for perhaps by a useful weight saving, in the event neither transpires. The performance of this i4 version, 62 miles an hour in 4.3 seconds en route to 171 miles an hour, is virtually the same as its Japanese powered showroom counterpart, and rather sadly, it weighs just 11 kilograms less. It doesn't sound quite as good either. You're never in doubt that just 4 cylinders beat behind you. Though if you venture towards the high set 7,200 RPM rev counter red line, a lovely zingy fizzy Honda VTEC style wail sets in. Whatever engine you choose, you'll find it screwed into a typical Lotus extruded and bonded aluminium chassis. And there are 3 driving modes: Tour, Sport and Track, which each progressively deepen the exhaust note. Neither of these settings affect steering, which is still of the old tech hydraulic kind. Lotus R&D head Gavin Kershaw apparently insisted on it. Drive modes don't affect the suspension either, and on that subject, the brand offers a choice of road-orientated touring suspension or a much firmer track-orientated sports setup. To be honest, we feared the worst when we learned that this test car would feature sports spec, but actually it's not too bad. Unless you'll be a track day regular though, you'll prefer the touring setup, which gives you less of a feeling of tobogganing on a tin tray over porous surfaces. What's good is that with neither spec do you need to fear speed humps and B-road potholes in the way that you would with a supercar, or with that matter with an old Exige. And that makes a big difference to the way that you can use this car. Ideally, you'd add the optional Lotus driver pack, which gives you a track mode, launch control and switchable exhaust sound. However you specify your Emira though, all the things you'd expect a Lotus to do well are done brilliantly. The steering rack's brimming with feel, the AP racing brakes anchor you with ferocity, and traction through the turns from the vast 295 section rear tyres is awesome. Lotus claims the Emira can corner at up to 1.2 G. Choose this i4 version rather than the V6, and that's aided by a clever brake-based E-differential function for the rear. If you're only ever going to be trailering your Emira to track days, then you might be in the market for the rare V6 GT4 version developed for extreme circuit use. Even in this standard model though, the confidence you feel at the wheel through the turns is better even than in a Cayman, which in our book is really saying something. And point-to-point cross-country trips can be completed with awesome speed. We wish this is what the old Evora had looked like. The Emira is gorgeous, no question. If you choose it over its 2 main rivals, it'll be because you think it looks more exotic than a Porsche 718 Cayman, true, and more aggressive than an Alpine A110, also true. You might even, like us, see shades of Ferrari 458 Italia here. We love these scalloped sides, and all these ducts and scoops are absolutely functional. The wheels, well, they'll always be of a 20-inch V-spoke design with chunky calipers coloured to taste. From the front, you really get that junior Ferrari feel. There's pavement presence here the old Evora never had. Branded LED headlights flank this unusual slashed bonnet panel. Unlike in a Cayman, this doesn't conceal extra frunk space. That's due to crash structure demands. Instead, the bonnet is bolted down and can't be raised except for maintenance. Here at the back, you won't be able to resist raising the tailgate and taking a look at the engine. Though with the 4-cylinder AMG sourced i4 unit that we've got here, there's not really that much to see. The power plant covered with plastic cladding, like is also the case with this car's Porsche 718 Cayman and Alpine A110 rivals. As in an A45S, but not in a C63, this M139 series Mercedes unit is mounted transversely, cradled by an i4 specific aluminium subframe that's 12 kilograms lighter than the steel one used by the V6. But that V6 version offers a better visual experience. With that variant, you can see the top of this supercharger through the tailgate glass. At least these big bore tailpipes are common to both Lotus variants. The lottery level looks haven't come at the expense of practicality. On the contrary, this is the easiest Lotus sports car in history to get in and out of, though the wide door sills mean that access and exit still aren't as straightforward as they would be in an Alpine or a Cayman. Once at the wheel, you sit low in front of an octagonally shaped wheel decorated with buttons that are all too easy to inadvertently knock as you turn it. For the first time in a Lotus, you start the car with a button, this one embellished with a red flap, and the column stalks are borrowed from fellow Geely brand Volvo. Ahead of you are two digital screens, one 12.3-inch display for the instruments, the other a 10.25-inch monitor in the centre of the dash for infotainment. Graphics are minimalist and climate functions are separated out into proper buttons. It's a better appointed, more luxurious cabin than you might expect from a Lotus, with an RT leather-on metal gear selector, sports pedals and beautiful aluminium paddles for this satisfyingly grippy little three-spoke wheel. This, like the upholstery, can be trimmed in leather or race-style Alcantara, and the seats are heated and 12-way electrically adjustable, though they have jutting headrests and could be a tad more supportive. Luxury cabin touches include this stitched dash top and these silver KEF speaker grills, plus you'll probably want to add this Alcantara headliner. We mentioned screens. Let's start with the instrument display, where a rev counter band arches over readouts for speed on the left and gear and drive mode selection on the right. In between is a selectable center section where you can choose between G-force readings, a lap timer, an engine oil level readout, nav mapping, which shows full screen, your audio choice and phone settings. Anything else that you'll need will almost certainly be found on this center monitor, which has a home screen that displays either with rows of icons or with this two-box layout via which you scroll up and down through preferred features. The larger left-hand box can show either a G-force meter, a lap timer, a trip statistic graph or nav mapping. The smaller right-hand box can show tyre pressures, audio selection or phone settings. There's a box for climate features to the right of this monitor, and the icon screen includes a useful performance section that, alongside a G-force meter, shows you downforce, power, torque and turbo boost. What about ergonomics and practicality? Well, surprisingly, there's a great view out of the windscreen ahead. Yes, the low nose vanishes out of your sight line, but the twin humps of the front wheel arches are easily visible, with their high points precisely over the front tyre's centre lines, so that on a track it's easy to precisely clip each corner apex. It's more practical in here than you might expect too. There's a decent glove box, reasonable door pockets, and near to the Emira badge centre vents, space for your phone ahead of the gear stick. Cup holders reside between the seats, with a deep lidded storage box just behind containing both USB-A and USB-C ports. Unlike the old Evora, there are no tiny 911 style rear seats, so you can squash luggage in the 208 litre space behind these front chairs. That's more space than you actually get in the boot, so you'll definitely need to pack light. It's just 151 litres in size and must also accommodate the tyre repair kit and warning triangle. It gets pretty warm in here too. Now, in theory, this Emira is going to be available in a relatively affordable base edition form, but that wasn't being offered at the time of our test in summer 2024, even though by then the brand was almost 2 years into Emira production. As we filmed, Lotus still hadn't fulfilled all of its orders for the better equipped initial first edition models, so prices for these were all the brand was quoting at the time of this review. As we filmed, Lotus was asking from around £81,500 for this Emira in its 4-cylinder 2-litre i4 first edition form with an 8-speed auto, which is what we have here, or from £86,000 in first edition 3.5-litre V6 supercharged guys. That's with manual transmission. It's £1,800 more for an auto gearbox. Now you're going to need to know how this pricing compares to what's required from this model's two most obvious rivals. At the time of this test, the most obvious alternative, Porsche's 718 Cayman, had just a year of its life left, Porsche having announced that it would cease production of the combustion version of that car in 2025. Lotus has obviously pitched Emira pricing with the top Cayman model in mind, the GTS 4-litre, which has a 395 brake horsepower engine and cost from just over £75,000 as we filmed. But it's worth pointing out that the mid-level Cayman S with 345 bhp is only fractionally slower and costs a lot less, from around £64,000 as we filmed. The other alternative, the Alpine A110, has a lot less power, 252 to 300 brake horsepower depending on variant, but goes just as fast thanks to its light weight. As we filmed, Alpine pricing went from well below Emira levels, from around £55,000 for the base version, to well above, around £97,000 for the A110R. Neither of these alternatives, though, has quite the street presence or track style feel of an Emira. If you agree and you've settled on this Lotus, you'll then be deciding between the two offered suspension setups, either road-orientated touring, which has Goodyear Eagle F1 Super Sport tyres, or, as in this case, firmer track-style sports, which gives you the option of stickier Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2 rubber. You'll also want to consider the optional Lotus driver pack, which gives you a track mode, launch control, and switchable exhaust sound. Should you be able to find one to buy, the base edition version comes with most of what you'd want. You can tick off 20-inch 10-spoke alloy wheels, LED automatic headlights, climate control, keyless go, cruise control, power folding door mirrors and rear parking sensors. Inside there's powered seats, a 7-speaker 128-watt audio system, satellite navigation and Apple CarPlay, Android Auto smartphone mirroring. The first edition version we have here adds 20-inch V-spoke forged alloy wheels, Napa leather upholstery, heated seats, a black Alcantara headliner and a KEF premium audio system with 560 watts, 10 channels and a fresh air subwoofer. If you want to go further, there is of course lots to spend your money on via the Lotus configurator. You can add a convenience pack, that gives you reversing camera, front parking sensors, rain sensing wipers, or a Lotus design pack with privacy glass and coloured brake calipers. There are 3 designs of 20-inch wheel with your choice of caliper colour. There's a wide choice of colours which you can embellish with meaner looking darker exterior trim as part of an optional black pack. Upholstery is in black, red or tan Napa leather or black Alcantara, a material that can, as here, be used to trim the little steering wheel as an alternative to leather. We'd want to add a vehicle tracking system too. Predictably, there aren't that many ADAS camera safety functions, but if you're anything like us, you might be happy to do without those. There's no self-steering lane keeping function, for instance. Good. When a car steers like this, you'll want to do it yourself. You can't expect the kind of fuel consumption figures we used to see from previous era lightweight Lotus Sportscars. This one tips the scales at 1,440 kilograms. Compare that to the 1,105 kilograms of a rival Alpine A110. The result of that shows up in the efficiency stats, of course. In 3.5 litre V6 form, the Emira manages 25.2 mpg on the combined cycle and 258 grams per kilometre of CO2. Don't expect too much better than that if you opt for the alternative i4 4-cylinder 2-litre turbo version. Lotus quotes 25 miles to the gallon and a 208 grams per kilometre CO2 figure. A graphical trip statistics screen on the centre monitor allows you to oversee your ongoing frugality. Whatever your Emira engine choice, you will of course need to budget generously for tyres and brake pads if, as you should, you regularly take your Emira on track days. A 5-year warranty is standard in the UK. Lotus offers roadside assistance across Europe for 5 years after vehicle purchase. The Emira, in so many ways, is the car its predecessor, the Evora, should have been in terms of styling, cabin quality, technology and day-to-day usability. It is, at last, a Lotus you don't have to be a dyed-in-the-wool brand loyalist to consider, and we've been waiting for one of those ever since the marque was formed by Colin Chapman back in 1948. Chapman didn't much care if those outside the track day set didn't want his cars, but current day new era owner Geely does. That Chinese conglomerate doesn't seem to have much intention of allowing Lotus to produce models like the Emira in the future, but we can at least be thankful that it has permitted the company one last chance to get a classic sports car right. Right in the sense that it's accessible to a wide audience, not just a few. The Emira is, and it's a mark of its success that it will appeal to customers as diverse as someone used to the old track-ready Exige, as well as someone swapping out of a 718 Cayman. If you've decided on this Lotus, try and get the opportunity to try both engines before finalising purchase. They're really quite different. We'd prefer the V6 because it sounds better, has a slicker auto gearbox and offers the option of the manual stick shift that, as enthusiasts, we'd prefer. We've a suspicion that the rarer manual version might hold its value a little better too. So where does all that leave us? Well, with this Emira, the best was indeed saved until last. It isn't as light as an A110 or as relatively practical as that Porsche, but it's a proper Lotus, a future collector's item, and a car that gets that final ringing endorsement. Colin Chapman would have liked it.